When her young daughter died in a devastating house fire, she believed it was a tragic accident, caused by her own negligence, forgetting to turn off the gas before leaving home. The guilt consumed her as she blamed herself for her child's death, barely able to function through the funeral arrangements. But at the service, she noticed her ex-husband behaving strangely, with an expression that felt out of place for a grieving father. What at first seemed like a simple misunderstanding would soon reveal the shocking truth about what had actually happened to her daughter, uncovering her ex-husband's true nature. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. The funeral home was quiet except for the occasional sniffle and the soft hum of the air conditioning. At the center front was the coffin, its polished mahogany surface gleaming under the soft lights. Beside it stood a framed photograph of a young girl named Lena Brooks. The photo captured her bright smile, her blonde short hair, and those big brown eyes that could melt anyone's heart. Below the image were the dates: March 15th, 2022, May 10th, 2024. She was only 2 years old. The funeral service was nearly concluded. Ellie Brooks stood at the coffin, gazing down at her daughter's peaceful face one last time. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks, dampening the collar of her black dress. The makeup she had carefully applied that morning to cover the burn marks on her right cheek was beginning to smudge, revealing patches of reddened, healing skin. As she looked at Lena's small body, dressed in her favorite pink dress with lace trim, memories of the fire that took her daughter's life flashed through her mind. It had been just 3 days ago, but it felt like a lifetime. That day had started like any other. Ellie and Lena had gone grocery shopping at the supermarket, where Lena had insisted on pushing the miniature shopping cart designed for children. The toddler had proudly placed apples and a box of her favorite cereal in the cart, beaming with accomplishment each time. After checking out, they drove home, Lena babbling in her car seat about the sticker the cashier had given her. When they arrived home, Ellie unbuckled Lena from her car seat and watched as her daughter scampered up the front steps and into the house, while Ellie gathered grocery bags from the trunk. She remembered thinking how independent her daughter was becoming, how she insisted on doing things herself now. Ellie was just reaching for the last bag when she heard Lena screaming. At first she thought it was just another of her daughter's tantrums. Lena often got impatient when Ellie spent too long outside, wanting her mother's undivided attention. But when the screams grew louder and changed in tone from petulant to terrified, alarm shot through Ellie's body. She dropped the grocery bag and rushed toward the house. The moment she opened the door, thick black smoke hit her face. Through the haze, she could see flames leaping from the kitchen. And there, in the middle of the chaos, was Lena, her small frame silhouetted against the growing inferno. Ellie had frozen, paralyzed by shock and fear. Precious seconds ticked by as her brain struggled to process the horrific scene before her. When she finally snapped out of it, she ran back to the car to retrieve her phone and dialed emergency services with trembling fingers. "Fire, please, my daughter is inside," she had screamed into the phone, her voice breaking. The dispatcher had tried to keep her calm, asking for her address and telling her help was on the way. But Ellie couldn't wait. She rushed back to the house, choking on the thickening smoke as she tried to locate the fire extinguisher. When she finally found it in the hall closet, she realized with horror that it was outdated, the needle on the pressure gauge pointing to the red zone. She discarded the useless extinguisher and tried to find the fire blanket she kept in the kitchen, but the smoke was everywhere now, stinging her eyes and burning her lungs. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe. She called out for Lena repeatedly, her voice growing hoarse, and by the time the firefighters arrived, the entire kitchen and half the living room were engulfed in flames. They pulled Ellie outside as she fought and screamed, desperate to reach her daughter. One of the firefighters had to physically restrain her, as 2 others rushed into the burning building to search for Lena. Ellie remembered the agonizing wait, standing barefoot on her front lawn, portions of her right arm, cheek, and ear burned and blistering. The neighbors had gathered, some offering blankets and comfort, others just staring in horror at the flames devouring the small suburban home. When the firefighters finally emerged with Lena's tiny, limp body, Ellie had collapsed to her knees. Her daughter's face was blackened with soot, and burns covered parts of her small body. They had rushed both mother and daughter to the hospital, but despite the doctor's best efforts, Lena had succumbed to her injuries and smoke inhalation the following morning. Ellie hadn't left her daughter's side, holding her small hand and begging her to wake up. When the heart monitor flatlined and the doctors pronounced time of death, something inside Ellie had died too. A gentle hand on her shoulder pulled her back to the present moment. She turned to see her ex-husband Orland standing beside her. His dark suit was perfectly pressed, his hair neatly combed. Despite their divorce 2 years ago, they had maintained a civil relationship for Lena's sake. "It's time," he said softly. Ellie nodded and stepped back, allowing the priest to approach. She watched through blurred vision as the coffin was slowly closed, sealing away her daughter forever. The soft thud as it latched seemed to echo through her soul. She felt another presence beside her and turned to see her sister, Margot. Unlike Ellie's disheveled appearance, Margot looked composed in her black pantsuit, though her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. A professional camera hung around her neck. As a photographer, she had offered to capture moments of the funeral, something Ellie had initially resisted, but eventually agreed to. Someday, perhaps, she might want these memories preserved. Margot wrapped her arms around Ellie, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's okay to grieve," she whispered. "Take it slowly. I'm here for you, every step of the way." Ellie leaned into her sister's embrace, drawing strength from her presence. Despite their occasional disagreements, Margot had always been her rock, especially since the divorce from Orland. The priest's voice cut through her thoughts as he delivered the final prayers, his words barely registering in Ellie's grief-fogged mind. Then came the line of mourners, friends and family who had come to pay their respects. They shook hands, exchanged hugs, and offered words of condolence that all seemed to blend together. "She's with the angels now. Time will heal. If there's anything we can do." Ellie nodded mechanically, thanking them for coming, but feeling detached from it all, as if she were watching the scene unfold from a distance. Finally, the priest announced that the cremation would take place the following morning, at 10 a.m. Ellie had decided against burial, wanting instead to keep Lena's ashes in an urn at home. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving her small daughter alone in a cemetery. As the mourners gradually filed out of the funeral home, the cavernous room grew quiet once more. Ellie thanked the priest for his service, her voice barely above a whisper. Orland approached her again, his expression solemn. "You can stay at my place for a while," he offered, "until you figure out what to do about the house." Ellie shook her head. "Thank you, but I'll be staying with Margot." Margot, who had been collecting her camera equipment, looked up and nodded. "That's no problem at all. You can stay as long as you need, sis." Orland seemed to take the rejection in stride. "All right then. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me." The three of them walked together to the parking lot, an awkward silence hanging between them. Ellie felt drained, emptied of all emotion. The bright afternoon sun seemed almost offensive in its cheerfulness, a stark contrast to the darkness that had settled over her life. The parking lot outside the funeral home was bathed in golden sunlight, the kind that photographers call magic hour. The beauty of the afternoon was lost on Ellie, who walked with her head down, her steps slow and uncertain. Beside her, Margot paused occasionally to capture images of the landscape, the funeral home's Victorian architecture against the backdrop of maple trees, their leaves just beginning to turn amber with the approaching fall. "The light is perfect," Margot murmured, more to herself than to Ellie, as she adjusted her camera settings and took another shot. Ellie remained silent, her mind still inside the funeral home with Lena. She hadn't really wanted the funeral photographed, but Margot had insisted it would be important later, when the initial shock of grief had subsided. "Memories fade," she had said, "but photographs preserve them." As they neared Margot's car, a sleek silver Volvo, Margot stopped to review the photos she had taken. She swiped through them on her camera's display screen, nodding with satisfaction at some, frowning at others. Then she accidentally pressed the back button, and the screen displayed an image from inside the funeral home. Margot's brow furrowed as she stared at the picture. It showed Ellie standing by the coffin, her side to the camera, her shoulders slumped in grief. Behind her stood Orland, and his expression made Margot pause. While everyone else in the frame wore expressions of appropriate solemnity, Orland's lips were curled in what could only be described as a smile. Not a sad, reminiscing smile, but something colder, almost triumphant. "Margot," Ellie called, her voice sharp with sudden concern. "Let's go." Margot, who had been standing a few feet away, lost in thought, looked up. "Coming," she said, making her way to the driver's side of the car. Once inside, Margot passed the camera to Ellie, seated in the front passenger seat. "Ellie, you need to look at something." Ellie sighed, leaning her head against the headrest. "Not now, Margot. I'm not in the mood to look at photos." "No, I need you to look at a particular photo," Margot insisted, starting the engine. "Find the one where you're by the coffin and Orland is standing behind you." Reluctantly, Ellie took the camera and began to scroll through the images. When she came to the photo Margot had mentioned, she frowned, studying it with growing unease. Margot glanced over, noting her sister's expression. "Why is Orland smiling like that behind your back?" she asked, her voice low and intense. "Doesn't that strike you as inappropriate and strange?" Ellie continued to stare at the image, her frown deepening. There was indeed something unsettling about Orland's expression, a discordance with the somber occasion. But she wasn't ready to analyze it, not when her grief was still so raw. "It's probably just coincidence," she said finally, switching off the camera. "You know how cameras can catch people in transitional expressions. Maybe he was about to say something." Margot shook her head firmly. "That's not a transitional expression, Ellie. Look at that smile, it's almost menacing." Irritation flared in Ellie. She had already told Margot she wasn't in the mood to look at photographs or discuss her relationship with Orland. They had had this conversation countless times before. Margot had never liked Orland, even when they were married. "I already told you I'm not in the mood for this," Ellie snapped. "Orland and I may be divorced, but we've kept things civil for Lena's sake. He cared about her. If he didn't, he wouldn't have even attended the funeral." "I'm just saying it's suspicious," Margot persisted, as she navigated the car out of the parking space. "You've always made excuses for him, even when—" "Stop it," Ellie's voice rose, her patience at an end. "We agreed to stop arguing about Orland after the divorce. I respected your opinion even though I disagreed with it, and now, on the day of my daughter's funeral, you choose to bring this up again." "Because I'm worried about you," Margot countered, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "You're going through hell right now, and I don't want him taking advantage of your vulnerability." "Taking advantage," Ellie repeated incredulously, "by offering me a place to stay after my house burned down, by attending his daughter's funeral. What exactly is he gaining here, Margot?" The argument escalated, old wounds reopening as they traded accusations. Margot brought up incidents from Ellie's marriage that she had long tried to forget, while Ellie accused her sister of never giving Orland a chance. Finally, as they approached the exit of the funeral home complex, Ellie had had enough. "Stop the car," she demanded. Margot looked at her in disbelief. "What? No, where would you go?" "That's not your problem," Ellie said through gritted teeth. "I just can't handle this conflict with you right now. Not today." When Margot continued driving, Ellie reached for the door handle. "I said stop the car." Faced with her sister's determination, Margot finally pulled over to the side of the road, still within the funeral home complex. "This is ridiculous," she said as Ellie unfastened her seatbelt. "Where are you going to go?" But Ellie was already opening the door, stepping out into the warm afternoon. "I'll figure it out," she said, slamming the door behind her, the sound echoing her finality. No sooner had Ellie stepped away from Margot's car than she heard the purr of another engine behind her. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up, and Orland emerged, his expression concerned. "Everything all right?" he asked, taking in Ellie's flustered appearance and Margot's car pulling away. "I saw you two arguing." Ellie sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Just sister stuff. I'm not going home with Margot after all." Orland nodded, seeming to understand without needing further explanation. "Get in," he said, gesturing to his car. "My offer still stands. You can stay at my place until you figure things out." For a moment, Ellie hesitated. She didn't have many options. Her home was destroyed, her relationship with her sister was currently strained, and she wasn't close enough with anyone else to impose on them during this difficult time. Reluctantly, she nodded and approached the passenger side of Orland's car. As she settled into the leather seat, she watched Margot's Volvo disappear down the road. A pang of regret shot through her, but pride prevented her from calling her sister back. They both needed time to cool off. Orland slid into the driver's seat beside her, his cologne, the same one he'd worn throughout their marriage, filling the enclosed space. It was a scent she had once found comforting, but now found slightly cloying. They drove in silence for a while, the only sound the soft classical music playing through the car's premium speakers. Orland had always preferred classical, Bach in particular, claiming it helped him think. Ellie had never acquired the same appreciation for it, preferring contemporary pop or folk music that told stories. Eventually, Orland broke the silence. "Want to talk about what happened with Margot?" Ellie shook her head. "It's just sister arguments, nothing big." "If it makes you decide not to stay with her, I'd say it's big enough," Orland observed, his eyes steady on the road ahead. "I don't want to talk about it right now," Ellie said firmly. "Losing Lena and going through the funeral today has been hard enough. Tomorrow we still have the cremation, and I just need to be calm tonight. That's why I can't stay with Margot. I'll deal with our issues later." Orland nodded, accepting her explanation without pressing further. After another stretch of silence, he changed the subject. "The burn wound on your ear and cheek is healing well," he noted. "How about your arms and legs?" The question caught Ellie off guard. She hadn't given much thought to her own injuries, consumed as she was by her grief for Lena. The burns on her right arm were still painful, requiring daily cleaning and bandaging, and her legs had various minor burns that itched as they healed. But physically, she was going to be fine, unlike her daughter. "They're healing," she said simply, turning to look out the window at the passing suburban landscape. Orland seemed to sense her reluctance to discuss her injuries, and fell silent once more. They drove the rest of the way to his house without speaking, each lost in their own thoughts. Ellie watched as familiar neighborhoods gave way to more upscale areas. After their divorce, Orland had moved to a gated community in the affluent part of town, a stark contrast to the modest suburban home she had shared with Lena. His new house was modern and minimalist, all glass and sharp angles, a bachelor pad that had never been intended for a child. As they turned into the gated community, passing the security checkpoint where the guard nodded in recognition at Orland, Ellie felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The emotional toll of the day was finally catching up to her. Orland, glancing at her profile, seemed to notice. "We're almost there," he said softly. "You can rest soon." Ellie merely nodded, too drained to respond verbally. The car continued down the tree-lined street, eventually pulling into the driveway of a modern two-story house with a perfectly manicured lawn. As the garage door lifted and Orland drove inside, Ellie couldn't help but compare this pristine, soulless space to her own home, now half destroyed, with its toys scattered across the lawn, crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, and the small vegetable garden she and Lena had planted together in the spring. The contrast was stark and painful. Orland cut the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. "We're here," he said unnecessarily, unbuckling his seatbelt. Ellie followed suit, stepping out of the car into the immaculate garage. She followed Orland into the house, feeling like a stranger in a museum, afraid to touch anything, out of place in these sterile surroundings. Orland led Ellie through the sleek modern kitchen, down a hallway lined with abstract art, and up to a guest bedroom. The room was tastefully decorated in neutral tones, with a large, comfortable-looking bed and a small seating area by the window. "You can use this room," he said, standing aside to let her enter. "The bathroom is through that door. There are fresh towels in the cabinet, and I can lend you some clothes to sleep in if you need them." Ellie nodded, setting her purse down on a minimalist side table. "Thank you," she said quietly. "If you need anything, just let me know." Orland continued. "Make yourself at home. My room is at the end of the hall and my office is downstairs next to the living room." "I'll probably just rest today," Ellie said, running a hand through her hair. "I haven't been sleeping well and I'm exhausted. I want to feel rested for—" She swallowed hard. "For tomorrow's cremation." "I understand." Orland lingered for a moment, then stepped back. "I'll be downstairs if you need me." Once alone, Ellie sat on the edge of the bed, feeling its firm support beneath her. She took out her phone to check for messages and noticed several from Margot. Opening her inbox, she read the most recent one. "Ellie, I'm so sorry. I was out of line and should have known better than to press you on a day like today. You're grieving and I should have respected that. But I'm still worried about the photo. There's something wrong there. Normal people don't smile at funerals like that. I've attached the photo again. Please be careful. I love you." -M attached was the image Margot had shown her earlier. Ellie opened it, studying it more carefully this time. The photo showed her from the side angle, standing at Lena's coffin, her shoulders hunched in grief. Behind her, slightly to the right, stood Orland, and indeed his expression was disconcerting. While everyone else in the room wore appropriately solemn expressions, this photo showed Orland's lips were curled in what could only be described as a smirk. His eyes, focused on the back of Ellie's head, held an expression that made her skin crawl, cold, calculating, almost triumphant. Ellie zoomed in on his face, trying to rationalize what she was seeing. Could it be just an unfortunate moment captured by the camera? A transitional expression as he was about to speak or move. But the more she looked, the more unsettled she became. There was nothing ambiguous about that smile. It was deliberate, inappropriate, and deeply disturbing. She set her phone down on the bed and lay back, her head sinking into the plush pillow. As she stared at the ceiling, her thoughts drifted back to the day of the fire. She had relived it countless times since it happened, each time finding new reasons to blame herself. If only she had responded to Lena's first cry instead of assuming it was a tantrum. If only she hadn't frozen in panic and had called emergency services immediately. If only she had kept the fire extinguisher up to date and the fire blanket readily accessible. If only she had been a better mother, Lena might still be alive. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled onto the pillow. She didn't bother to wipe them away, letting them flow freely down her temples and into her hair. The grief was a physical ache in her chest, a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. As exhaustion claimed her, her last conscious thought was of Orland's smile in that photograph and Margot's warning to be careful. Then darkness enveloped her, providing temporary relief from her torment. When Ellie woke, her head was pounding, and her mouth was dry. She blinked in confusion, taking a moment to remember where she was. The guest room in Orland's house, the funeral, Lena. She sat up, grimacing at the pain that shot through her temples. Checking the bedside clock, she saw it was 1:30 p.m. She had only been asleep for about 30 minutes, but it felt longer, as if she had descended into some deep, dreamless void. Ellie reached for her phone, expecting to find it where she had left it on the bed, but it wasn't there. She frowned, patting the covers around her, then checking the floor and the bedside table. Nothing. She distinctly remembered having it near her as she fell asleep, looking at the photo Margot had sent. She also noticed that someone had draped a blanket over her while she slept. It must have been Orland, she realized, unsure whether to feel comforted or unsettled by the thought of him entering the room while she was unconscious. Rising from the bed, Ellie moved to the door and stepped out into the hallway. She could hear movement downstairs and followed the sound to the living room, where she found Orland arranging food on the dining table. "You're up," he said, looking up with a smile. "I was about to come check on you. You haven't eaten anything since morning, have you? I thought you might be hungry." Ellie took in the spread on the table, a simple but appetizing lunch of sandwiches, fruit, and a small salad. Orland moved to the kitchen counter and returned with a steaming mug. "It's spiced apple tea," he explained, handing it to her. "A colleague from India gave it to me. It's good for regulation and calming the nerves." "Thank you," Ellie said, accepting the mug and feeling its warmth against her palms. She set it down on the dining table, not ready to drink just yet. Have you seen my phone? I had it with me when I lay down, but now I can't find it. Oh, it's right here, Orland said, pointing to the device resting next to one of the plates. It was ringing several times and I didn't want it to wake you, so I took it. Hope you don't mind. Ellie frowned, finding it strange and somewhat intrusive that he would take her phone without permission. It was an intimate boundary that even spouses didn't casually cross, let alone ex-spouses. Orland seemed to notice her unease. I'm sorry if that was overstepping, he added quickly. It was just that you were finally getting some rest and I didn't want you disturbed. There were several calls from Margot. Ellie picked up her phone and saw that indeed there were multiple missed calls from her sister. A wave of guilt washed over her as she remembered their argument and her abrupt departure. Sit, eat something, Orland urged, pulling out a chair for her. The tea is getting cold. Ellie settled into the chair, picking up the mug and taking a cautious sip. The tea was fragrant and soothing, with notes of cinnamon, clove, and something else she couldn't quite identify. This is good, she admitted, taking another sip. Thank you. She picked at the food, not really hungry, but knowing she needed to eat. The small bites she managed were tasteless in her mouth, but the act of eating itself seemed to awaken her appetite gradually. By the time she finished half a sandwich and some fruit, she felt marginally better. Orland sat across from her, watching her with an expression that alternated between concern and something else, something she couldn't quite place. I suppose you saw some pictures on my phone when you took it, Ellie said finally, breaking the silence between them. Orland nodded. Ah, yes, I saw the photo. Sorry, I was just rejecting the incoming call and didn't mean to snoop. Ellie set down her cup, gathering her courage. That photo was actually the reason for my argument with Margot, she admitted. She was taking photographs during the service and unintentionally captured that moment. Orland's expression remained neutral. I see. She pointed out that you were... Ellie hesitated, not wanting to sound accusatory. That you seemed to be smiling in the photo. Ah, that, Orland said, waving a dismissive hand. I meant it to be reassuring, you know, to lighten the mood. It was a difficult moment for everyone. Ellie frowned, studying his face. But why would you smile at all? It was a funeral, Orland, our daughter's funeral. Something flickered in Orland's eyes, annoyance perhaps, or impatience. People have different stress responses, he said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. Some even laugh when they're nervous. It doesn't mean anything. That's a different case, Ellie countered. I know you, and you don't smile when you're nervous. You become withdrawn and quiet. Orland's expression hardened. Let's not make this a big deal, Ellie. I just thought it was a sweet moment between you and Lena, that's all. The words hit Ellie like a slap. Sweet, she repeated incredulously. You think a mother saying goodbye to her dead 2-year-old child is sweet? Orland stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You're clearly not thinking straight, he said, his voice tight. You're upset, and that's understandable. But let's not create issues where there aren't any. Ellie stood as well, anger replacing her earlier caution. Perhaps Margot was right about you, she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. You haven't really bonded with Lena since birth. I thought it was just because you were busy and not hands-on with her care. Maybe that's why it was hard you to sympathize. Orland's face contorted with what appeared to be genuine hurt. That's an unfair assumption, he said, making an obvious effort to control his tone. Just because I smiled at her funeral doesn't mean I didn't love Lena. She was my daughter too, Ellie, and she always loved my smile. The reminder of Orland's infertility, a major strain on their marriage, made Ellie hesitate. He had long wanted more children, and realizing that conceiving Lena had taken years, only for his ability to have more to fade, had been crushing. Though their decision to have just one child was mutual, Ellie always sensed that Orland struggled to form the same bond with her that came naturally to her. I can't do this anymore, Ellie said finally, massaging her temples. This is crazy. I fought with my sister over that photo, and now with you. I need some air. She picked up her phone and headed back to the guest room to retrieve her purse. When she returned, she found Orland standing by the front door, blocking her path. What are you doing? Ellie asked, stopping a few feet from Orland. I'm just going out for a walk to clear my head. Orland remained where he was, his stance rigid, his expression darkening. I don't think that's a good idea right now. Ellie's frown deepened. I'm not asking for your permission, Orland. I just need some fresh air to calm down. There's no way you're leaving this place, Orland stated firmly, his voice dropping to a lower, more controlled tone that Ellie recognized from their marriage. It was the voice he used when he was trying to contain his anger. You have no right to prevent me from leaving, Ellie said, straightening her posture despite the unease growing in her stomach. You're not my husband anymore. You can't dictate what I can and cannot do. Orland's eyes narrowed. You're not going out of my sight ever again, Ellie. The words sent a chill down her spine. There was something possessive, almost threatening in the way he said it. Ellie took an instinctive step back. What do you mean by that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You can't keep me here against my will. That's illegal. I'll call the police. If you do that, Orland said, a strange smile spreading across his face. The same smile from the funeral photograph, she realized with dawning horror. Then I'll have to send you where Lena is now, too. Ellie stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. Are you threatening to kill me? You're the one who made me say it, Orland replied, his voice eerily calm as if they were discussing something as mundane as the weather. You're acting very strangely, Ellie said, trying to keep her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her. This isn't right or healthy, Orland. Please, let's just talk about this rationally. Before Orland could respond, the doorbell rang, its chime cutting through the tense atmosphere. Ellie's heart leapt with hope. Someone was here, someone could help her. Ellie, are you in there? It's Margot, her sister's voice called from outside. Ellie moved toward the door, but Orland blocked her path more decisively now. Open the door, she pleaded. It's my sister. No one enters or exits my house, Orland stated flatly. Tell her to go away. Ellie attempted to reach around him for the doorknob, but before she could touch it, Orland reached into his pocket and pulled out a flip knife, its blade glinting in the light streaming through the windows. Ellie gasped, stumbling backward. What's wrong with you? She demanded, fear giving way to a surge of anger. We were just talking about a photograph, and now you're threatening me with a knife. Outside, Margot continued to knock and ring the doorbell. Orland, Ellie, I know you're in there. I can hear voices. Please open the door. Orland remained unmoved, both physically at the door and emotionally to the pleas. You belong to me now, he said quietly. No one should stand between us. The strange phrasing caught Ellie's attention even through her fear. What do you mean, no one should stand between us? She asked, her mind racing. A terrible suspicion began to form. Orland, does this have something to do with Lena's death? Did you have something to do with the fire? The question hung in the air for a moment. Then, to Ellie's horror, Orland's expression changed to one of almost pride. It was me, he admitted without a trace of remorse. I leaked the gas and set the fire when you two went to the grocery store. I've been watching you. Ellie felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. She staggered back until her legs hit the edge of the sofa, and she sat down hard. You've been stalking me. You killed our daughter, she whispered, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what he was saying. This is crazy, Orland. You better said you didn't mean that. That wasn't my intention, Orland clarified, still holding the knife but seeming less focused on it now. I just wanted you both to move in with me again, to be a family. When you divorced me and took Lena, when you got full custody, I felt like my life was over. I was ready to accept it, to move on. But then I saw you with that man, and Lena was playing with him, laughing with him. You all looked so happy together. So you burned down our house? Ellie's voice rose in disbelief. You killed your own daughter out of jealousy? I didn't kill anyone, Orland shouted, his composure cracking. I just wanted to create a situation where you would need me again. I didn't know Lena would be hurt. She was supposed to be with you. But she wasn't, Ellie screamed back, tears streaming down her face. "She ran into the house ahead of me like she always did." "And you? All this time I thought it was my fault. I thought I had forgotten to turn off the gas before we left, that I had somehow started the fire, but it was you." Outside, Margot's knocking had ceased, but they could hear her talking, presumably on her phone. Orland glanced nervously at the door, then back at Ellie. "You never changed," Ellie continued, her voice shaking with rage and grief. "You've always been this toxic, controlling person who only cares about getting his way. You never really cared about me or Lena. It was always about you. Orland's expression darkened further. "I hated it when you got custody," he hissed. "I was supposed to have joint custody at least. Look at this house. Lena would love it here. But your sister helped you, didn't she? Helped you paint me as unstable, unfit. I was ready to have you out of my life after the divorce, but then I saw you. And Lena moving on, being happy without me. I couldn't let that happen." "Moving on? Orland, I only knew him. So you decided to burn down our home?" Ellie's voice was hollow with disbelief. "You thought that would somehow bring us back together? You're a monster." "I'm not a monster. I didn't kill that man you were seeing," Orland said, as if this were a point in his favor. "I could have, but I just burned the house down so you would return to me." "But you killed your own daughter instead," Ellie said, her words like ice. "You murdered a 2-year-old child, your own child, because you couldn't stand to see us happy with someone else." The accusation hung in the air between them, heavy and irrefutable. Outside, the house had grown quiet. Margot was no longer calling out or knocking. Ellie wondered if she had left, abandoning her here with this stranger who had once been her husband. The silence was broken by the sound of a door opening at the back of the house. Orland whirled around, knife still in hand, just as Margot appeared in the living room doorway. "What the hell is going on here?" Margot demanded, taking in the scene. Orland with a knife, Ellie's tear-streaked face, the palpable tension in the air. "Margot!" Ellie exclaimed, relief flooding through her. Orland turned fully toward Margot, his expression darkening. "How did you get in?" "No one answered the front door, but I heard shouting," Margot explained, her eyes never leaving the knife in Orland's hand. "I checked the service entrance and found it unlocked. What are you doing with that knife, Orland?" "No one leaves," Orland stated, his voice unnervingly calm again. "Both of you, sit down. Now." In the distance, a siren wailed, growing steadily louder. Orland's head snapped toward the sound, his face contorting with anger. "Did you call the police?" he demanded, advancing toward Margot. "I heard noises and no one opened the door," Margot said, backing away slowly. "I had a bad feeling, after what I saw in that photograph." "You," Orland spat, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You've always tried to come between us. From the day I met Ellie, you've been there, whispering in her ear, turning her against me." The police sirens grew louder, unmistakably heading in their direction. Orland's expression shifted from anger to something more desperate and dangerous. He seemed to realize that there would be no talking his way out of this situation, no returning to the life he had imagined. "You did this!" he hissed at Margot. With no warning, he lunged toward her, knife raised. Ellie screamed and jumped up from the sofa, rushing toward them. "No," she cried, grabbing Orland's arm and trying to pull him back. "Don't hurt her." But Orland was stronger, fueled by rage and desperation. He flung Ellie aside with such force that she crashed into the coffee table, sending it skidding across the hardwood floor. "Run!" Ellie shouted to Margot, scrambling to her feet. "Go out the back way." Margot turned and fled toward the rear of the house, with Ellie right behind her. They could hear Orland pursuing them, his footsteps heavy and purposeful. Just as they reached the back door, Ellie felt a sharp, burning pain in her leg. She stumbled, looking down to see Orland's knife protruding from her calf. He had thrown it with terrifying accuracy. "Ellie!" Margot screamed, turning back to help her sister. "Go!" Ellie gasped through the pain, trying to pull the knife out. "Get help!" But it was too late. Orland was upon them, his face twisted with rage. He yanked the knife from Ellie's leg, causing her to cry out in agony, and then turned toward Margot. "You did this," he repeated, advancing on her with the bloody knife. Margot backed away, hands raised defensively. "Orland, stop! The police are coming, you can't—" Her words were cut short as Orland lunged forward, driving the knife into her abdomen with brutal force. Margot's eyes widened in shock and pain, her mouth opening in a silent scream. "No!" Ellie shrieked, dragging herself toward them despite the wound in her leg. "Orland, stop!" But Orland seemed beyond reason, beyond control. He pulled the knife out only to stab Margot again and again, his face contorted in a rictus of hate. "You did this!" he shouted over and over, punctuating each accusation with another thrust of the knife. "You did this!" Ellie reached them, grabbing at Orland's arm, trying to stop the assault, but she was weakened by her injury and grief. Orland shoved her away, continuing his frenzied attack on Margot, who had collapsed to the floor, blood spreading across her blouse. The sound of the front door being broken down echoed through the house, followed by authoritative voices shouting, "Police! Drop the weapon! Hands in the air!" Orland froze mid-motion, the bloody knife still clutched in his hand. For a moment he seemed confused, as if waking from a trance. Then his eyes focused on the knife, on his blood-covered hands, on Margot's still form on the floor. "Drop the weapon now," an officer commanded, as several police personnel entered the room, guns drawn. Instead of complying, Orland suddenly whirled and threw the knife toward one of the officers. The blade missed its target, clattering harmlessly against the wall. Before he could make another move, two officers tackled him to the ground, securing his wrists with handcuffs despite his violent struggles. Ellie crawled to Margot's side, gathering her sister's limp body in her arms. "Margot," she sobbed, pressing her hand against the worst of the wounds in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me, please. Help is here." But Margot's eyes were unfocused, her breathing shallow and irregular. Blood soaked through her clothing, pooling on the hardwood floor beneath her. "We need an ambulance," Ellie screamed to the officers, who were now radioing for emergency medical services. "She's dying." One of the officers knelt beside them, applying pressure to Margot's wounds with practiced efficiency. "Ambulance is on the way," he assured Ellie, "just a few minutes out." But Ellie could see the grave concern in his eyes. Margot's injuries were severe, possibly fatal. "Stay with me," she whispered to her sister, squeezing her hand. "Don't leave me, Margot. Please don't leave me. I'm so sorry." As Orland was being led out in handcuffs, still struggling and shouting incoherently, he locked eyes with Ellie one last time. In that moment, she saw not the man she had once loved and married, but a psychopath. The same one who had smiled behind her back at their daughter's funeral, the same monster who had set fire to her home and killed their child, the same beast who had just stabbed her sister repeatedly in a fit of rage. The last thing Ellie heard before shock and blood loss caused her to lose consciousness was the wail of approaching sirens. Help arriving too late for Margot, perhaps too late for her as well. Ellie awoke to the sterile smell of disinfectant and the rhythmic beeping of medical equipment. Her eyes fluttered open to reveal a hospital room, white walls, fluorescent lighting, a window with blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. For a moment she couldn't remember how she had gotten there or why she was in pain. Then it all came rushing back. Orland's confession, the knife, Margot's blood spreading across the floor. She tried to sit up abruptly, her heart racing with panic. "Margot!" she gasped, the movement sending a sharp pain through her bandaged leg. A nurse who had been checking one of the monitors rushed to her side. "Easy there," she said soothingly, gently helping Ellie back against the pillows. "You shouldn't move too quickly. You've lost a lot of blood and the doctor just finished stitching your wound." "My sister," Ellie insisted, grasping the nurse's arm. "Margot Brooks. She was stabbed. Is she alive? Please, I need to know." The nurse's expression softened with sympathy, an expression Ellie had come to recognize and dread in the past few days. "The doctor will be in shortly," she said, avoiding Ellie's gaze. "He can explain everything." But Ellie already knew from the nurse's evasive answer what she would hear. She closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. First Lena, and now Margot, both taken from her by the same man. The door opened and a doctor entered, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Brooks," he began, his voice gentle but professional. "I'm Dr. Patel. You're in Good Samaritan Hospital. Do you remember what happened?" Ellie nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "You have a deep laceration in your right calf," Dr. Patel continued. "We've cleaned and stitched the wound. Fortunately, it missed major arteries, but you'll need physical therapy to regain full function of the leg." "My sister," Ellie managed to say, her voice hoarse. "Please tell me about my sister." Dr. Patel's expression mirrored the nurse's earlier sympathy. "I'm very sorry, Ms. Brooks. Your sister, Margot, suffered multiple stab wounds to her abdomen and chest. She lost a significant amount of blood before emergency services could reach her. Despite our best efforts, she went into sepsis. We couldn't save her." Though Ellie had expected this news, hearing it confirmed was like experiencing Lena's death all over again. A pain unlike any physical wound tore through her chest, and she curled forward, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold the pieces together. "No," she moaned, rocking back and forth despite the pain in her leg. "No, no, no." Dr. Patel placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I am truly sorry for your loss. We've notified the authorities and they're waiting to speak with you when you feel able. Take all the time you need." Ellie barely registered his words, lost in her grief. Not only had she lost her daughter to a senseless act of violence, but now her sister, her rock, her support, was gone too, murdered by the same man who had taken Lena from her. After the doctor left, Ellie lay in the hospital bed staring blankly at the ceiling. The physical pain in her leg was nothing compared to the emotional agony consuming her. She had lost everyone she loved. Her life had been systematically destroyed by the man she had once trusted enough to marry, to build a family with. She was still in this state of numb despair when two police officers knocked gently on the door and entered her room. One was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun. The other was a younger man with a carefully neutral expression. "Ms. Brooks," the female officer began, "I'm Detective Sarah Collins, and this is Detective Mike Ramirez. We understand this is an incredibly difficult time for you, but we need to ask you some questions about what happened at Orland Brooks's residence." Ellie nodded, forcing herself to focus. "He killed them both," she said simply, her voice hollow. "He killed my daughter and my sister." Detective Collins pulled up a chair beside the bed while Detective Ramirez remained standing, notebook in hand. "Can you tell us what happened today, starting from when you arrived at Mr. Brooks's house?" Ellie recounted the events as clearly as she could: the funeral, the argument with Margot over the photograph, her decision to go with Orland instead, and then the escalation that led to his confession and Margot's murder. "He admitted to setting the fire that killed my daughter," Ellie said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "He said he did it to force me to come back to him. He wanted us to be a family again, and he couldn't stand seeing me happy with someone else." The detectives exchanged a glance. "We'll need a formal statement once you're feeling better," Detective Collins said. "But this corroborates what we found at Mr. Brooks's house." "What did you find?" Ellie asked. "Drug paraphernalia in his bedroom," Detective Ramirez replied. "We're testing him for substances in his blood work, but initial indicators suggest he may have been using methamphetamines, which could explain the paranoia and violent behavior." Ellie shook her head slowly. "Drugs might have made it worse, but this wasn't just about drugs. Orland was always controlling, even during our marriage. He hated that I got full custody of Lena after the divorce. He couldn't accept that I was moving on with my life." As they continued talking, a nurse entered the room with a small cup of pills. "Time for your pain medication," she announced. "I don't want to be sedated," Ellie told her firmly. "I need to make arrangements for my sister and my daughter. Her cremation was scheduled for tomorrow morning." The nurse hesitated, looking to the detectives. "Perhaps just something mild for the pain," Detective Collins suggested gently. "You need to take care of yourself too, Ms. Brooks." Reluctantly, Ellie accepted the medication, washing it down with a sip of water. The detectives continued their questioning, focusing on the timeline of events and any prior incidents that might indicate Orland had been planning the fire or harboring violent intentions. "What will happen to him?" Ellie asked finally, her voice hard. "He's taken everything from me, my daughter, my sister, my home. He can't get away with this." "He won't," Detective Ramirez assured her. "Mr. Brooks is in custody, charged with the murder of Margot Brooks and assault with a deadly weapon against you. Once we verify his confession about the fire, we'll add charges for the arson and the death of Lena Brooks as well. Given the premeditated nature of his crimes, he's looking at life in prison, possibly without parole." The knowledge that Orland would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars provided little comfort to Ellie. It wouldn't bring back Lena or Margot. It wouldn't restore her home or heal her broken heart. But at least he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else. As the detectives prepared to leave, promising to return the following day for a formal statement, Ellie felt a resolve hardening within her. She would survive this. She would see justice done for Lena and Margot. And somehow, someday, she would find a way to live with the grief that now defined her existence. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the hospital room window, casting long rectangles of light across Ellie's bed. She had barely slept, drifting in and out of consciousness as nurses came to check her vitals and adjust her medication. The physical pain from her leg wound was constant, but manageable. The emotional agony was not. As she stared at the ceiling, a soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of Dr. Patel, clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Ms. Brooks," he greeted, his voice gentle. "How are you feeling today?" The question seemed almost absurd given the circumstances, but Ellie understood he was inquiring about her physical condition. "The leg hurts," she replied simply, "but I'll manage." Dr. Patel nodded, checking her bandages. "The surgical repair went well. There's no sign of infection, which is our primary concern at this stage. We'd like to keep you under observation for at least another 24 hours. "I need to leave today," Ellie said firmly. "I have funeral arrangements to make." The doctor's expression softened with concern. "Ms. Brooks, I understand your urgency, but your body needs time to heal. Perhaps someone else could—" "There is no one else," Ellie interrupted, her voice breaking. "My sister is dead. My daughter is dead. I'm the only one left to make these arrangements." Dr. Patel hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I'll prepare discharge papers, but I strongly recommend a follow-up in 3 days, and you'll need assistance, a walking cane at minimum, though crutches would be better." "The crutches will be fine," Ellie decided. After the doctor left, Ellie used the hospital phone to call the funeral home. Mr. Henson, the director who had handled Lena's service, answered with professional courtesy that shifted to genuine sympathy when she identified herself. "Ms. Brooks, I was so sorry to hear about your sister," he said. "The police contacted us yesterday about postponing your daughter's cremation." "Yes," Ellie confirmed, her voice steady despite the pain each word caused. "I need to arrange a service for my sister as well, and I'm thinking perhaps a joint cremation for both of them." "Of course," Mr. Henson replied gently. "We can certainly accommodate that. When you're released from the hospital, we can discuss the details in person." "I'll be there this afternoon," Ellie told him, "and I'd like to schedule the service for tomorrow if possible." There was a brief pause on the line. "That's quite expedited, Ms. Brooks. Are you certain you wouldn't prefer more time to—" "I'm certain," Ellie cut in. "I can't bear to wait any longer. They need to be at rest, and I need to—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the pressure building inside her, the desperate need to complete this terrible task so she could focus on ensuring Orland faced justice. "I understand," Mr. Henson said softly. "We'll make it happen. I'll begin the arrangements immediately." After ending the call, Ellie contacted her insurance company to start the claim process for her destroyed home. The representative was sympathetic, but warned that full settlement could take weeks or even months, especially with the investigation into the fire's cause, now part of a criminal case. Next, she called several hotels until she found one with an available room at a rate she could afford. She booked it for 2 weeks, hoping that would be enough time to secure more permanent accommodations. By the time the discharge nurse arrived with paperwork and aftercare instructions, Ellie had constructed a semblance of a plan, a framework to guide her through the next few days of unimaginable grief. "Detective Collins called," the nurse informed her. "She said she'll be here at noon to drive you wherever you need to go." Ellie nodded gratefully. The detective had been a steady presence since the attack, providing both professional assistance and unexpected compassion. When Detective Collins arrived, she brought with her a small duffel bag containing essentials, toiletries, a change of clothes, even a simple black dress suitable for a funeral. "Hospital social services put this together," she explained, "since you lost everything in the fire." The simple kindness brought tears to Ellie's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. With the detective's help, Ellie changed into the dress and carefully made her way out of the hospital, leaning heavily on her newly acquired cane. Each step sent pain shooting through her injured leg, but she welcomed it. Physical discomfort was easier to bear than the crushing weight of her grief. "The funeral home first?" Detective Collins asked once they were settled in her car. Ellie nodded. "Yes, I need to finalize the arrangements." At the funeral home, Mr. Henson greeted them with quiet dignity. He led Ellie to his office, where they discussed the details of the joint service, the music, readings, order of events, and the practical matters of cremation. "We've prepared the space as I believe you would want," Mr. Henson said, leading her to the same room where Lena's service had been held just 2 days earlier. Now 2 caskets stood at the front, Lena's small white one that Ellie had last seen at the funeral, and beside it, a larger one for Margot, both surrounded by hastily arranged but beautiful floral displays. "The flowers are from the police department," Detective Collins explained quietly, "and some from the hospital staff who treated you and your sister." Ellie approached the casket slowly, her steps uneven with the cane. She placed a hand on each, tears flowing freely down her face. In just a few days she had lost everything that mattered to her. Her child, her sister, her home, her sense of security, all destroyed by the man she had once loved. "I'd like to see them," she said, her voice barely audible. Mr. Henson hesitated. "Ms. Brooks, given the circumstances and the nature of your sister's injuries, I would advise against—" "I need to see them," Ellie insisted. "Both of them, please." After a moment's consideration, Mr. Henson nodded. "Of course, Detective Collins, perhaps you could assist Ms. Brooks while I prepare the viewing rooms." While they waited, Detective Collins asked gently, "Are you certain about this, Ellie? It can be very difficult to—" "I need to say goodbye," Ellie interrupted. "Properly. I didn't get to say goodbye to either of them." The detective nodded in understanding. The viewings were private, just Ellie and the detective. First they viewed Lena, small and peaceful in her casket, dressed in the same pink dress she had worn for the funeral. Then Margot, her makeup artfully applied to conceal the worst of the damage Orland had inflicted, dressed in her favorite blue blouse. Ellie spent long moments with each of them, whispering private goodbyes, apologies, promises of justice. When she finally emerged from the viewing rooms, her face was pale but composed, a new determination in her eyes. "I'll be back tomorrow for the service," she told Mr. Henson. 10 o'clock, as we discussed. The joint funeral service for Lena and Margot Brooks was held at 10 a.m. the following day, just as Ellie had arranged. Despite the short notice, the funeral home was filled with mourners, Margot's colleagues from the photography studio, neighbors from Ellie's now-destroyed home, teachers from Lena's daycare, and several police officers in uniform, including Detective Collins. Ellie sat in the front row alone but surrounded by a community of support. She wore the simple black dress provided by hospital social services, her cane resting against the chair beside her. The pain in her leg was a constant throbbing presence, but she refused additional medication, wanting her mind clear for this final goodbye. The service was beautiful in its simplicity. Piano music that both Lena and Margot had loved, readings from Margot's favorite poems, memories shared by friends and colleagues. Photographs of both were displayed on easels at the front, Lena laughing in a park, Margot capturing a sunset with her camera, the two of them together at Christmas. When it came time for Ellie to speak, she rose slowly, gripping her cane tightly, and made her way to the podium. For a moment she simply stood there, looking out at the gathered faces, many of whom she barely knew but who had come to share in her grief. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice quiet but steady. Lena was just beginning her life, curious, joyful, full of wonder at the world around her. Margot was in her prime, talented, compassionate, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. They loved each other deeply. She paused, gathering her strength for what she needed to say next. "Many of you know that my daughter died in a house fire, and my sister was murdered 2 days later. What you may not know is that both were killed by the same person, my ex-husband, Orland Brooks." A murmur ran through the gathering. Ellie continued, her voice gaining strength. "I tell you this not to cast a shadow over this service, but because Lena and Margot deserve the truth. They deserve justice, and I will spend every day ensuring they receive it." Her gaze swept the room, making brief eye contact with Detective Collins, who nodded encouragingly. "But today is not about how they died, it's about how they lived. The joy they brought, the love they shared, the light they cast in a world that can sometimes be very dark." Ellie then spoke of Lena's infectious laugh, her insistence on wearing rain boots even on sunny days, her love of strawberries and stories about dragons. She spoke of Margot's artistic eye, her adventurous spirit, her unfailing loyalty as a sister and aunt. "I don't know how to live in a world without them," she admitted, tears now flowing freely. "But I will find a way because that's what they would want. To honor them, I will continue. I will remember. I will seek justice. And someday, I hope to find joy again because that's what they would wish for me." When she finished, the room was silent except for the soft sounds of people wiping away tears. As Ellie made her way back to her seat, Detective Collins reached out to support her, helping her navigate the short distance. The remainder of the service passed in a blur. The caskets remained closed, and at the end, they were taken away to be cremated together, as Ellie had requested. She had decided to place their ashes in a shared urn, unwilling to separate them even in death. After the service, there was a small reception in an adjoining room. Ellie accepted condolences mechanically, thanking people for coming, accepting hugs and handshakes from strangers and acquaintances. Her mind was elsewhere, partly with Lena and Margot, partly already focused on the legal proceedings that would follow against Orland. As the reception wound down, Detective Collins approached her. "Are you ready to go? I can drive you to the hotel." Ellie nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Yes, thank you." The hotel was modest but clean, a temporary refuge until Ellie could figure out her next steps. Detective Collins helped her settle into the room, making sure she had everything she needed. "I'll pick you up tomorrow for your meeting with the district attorney," the detective promised. "Try to get some rest if you can." Once alone, Ellie sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the black dress from the funeral. The room was quiet, too quiet after the activity of the day, leaving too much space for her thoughts to spiral back to what she had lost. She reached for her phone and scrolled through photos, Lena making a sandcastle, Margot demonstrating how to hold a camera properly, the three of them at a petting zoo last spring. Each image was now a precious artifact of a life that no longer existed. As twilight settled outside her window, Ellie found herself contemplating the future for the first time since the fire. It stretched before her, empty and uncertain. She would need to find a new place to live, decide whether to return to her job as an elementary school teacher, rebuild some semblance of a life from the ashes of the old one. It seemed impossible, overwhelming. But as she looked at a photo of Lena and Margot laughing together, she felt a small spark of determination ignite within her. She would survive this. She would ensure justice was served, and somehow, someday, she would find a way to honor their memories by learning to live again. For now, though, she allowed herself to weep, for the daughter who would never grow up, for the sister who had tried to protect her, and for the life she had lost to one man's possessive rage. Outside her window, the first stars appeared in the night sky. Ellie watched them emerge, bright points of light in the darkness, and whispered a promise to those she had lost. "I will remember, I will survive, and I will make sure your story is told, your lives honored, your deaths not in vain." It was all she could offer now, remembrance, justice, and the promise to carry on.